perfect pivot to the medieval, which we will grapple with next semester. And it also is a way of getting a synoptic view of the entire course of civilizational effort that we began to engage with Gilgamesh. And here we are, the great themes of friendship and love and wisdom. Those are the wisdom and love are what I want to highlight here as the special concerns of St. Augustine, and how that contrasts with the philosophical pursuit of wisdom and the philosophical concern with eros. Is there a gulf between philosophical eros and Christian charity? Are they in continuity? So these are questions we want to think through. Book 7 is in the very center of the 13-book Confessions. So it obviously is books were written with a very special focus on how the numbers would line up. So if we're talking about the middle book of a work, then we know that this is crucial. And indeed, we have here Augustine's paying homage to the Platonists, whom we would call Neoplatonists now. These are thinkers like Porphyry and Plotinus that had continued the Platonic tradition these 800 years after Plato himself. And Augustine is saying that the Platonists have so much right, but what he did not find there is an actual way to get to the goal of what we would think of maybe as a mystical union with God. And therefore, he found that lacking. And that lack is really dealt with in the next book, 8, which is the moral conversion of Augustine. This is the intellectual conversion that we see in book 7, the thing that philosophy helps so much with, that is to try to get that immense task of being able to move beyond imagination and attain a truly spiritual or rational conception of reality, which is not something that should be taken for granted. We all have to learn everything that we learn through the senses. So if there is a thing that is beyond sensible reality, that would take an extra effort of transcendence to get there. And that's what Augustine recounts in the first part of this book. He refers to his time as about a decade with the Manichees, whom he had thrown in with because they had a way of talking about scripture that was that made sense in terms of explaining away some of the difficulties. Why is it that the moral code that we see in the Old Testament doesn't seem to be the same one that the Christian church of his time and now maintained? Like, why would the patriarchs be able to have many wives and that not be kosher now, and so on? It was his time with Bishop Ambrose of Milan that was so decisive in giving Augustine an opportunity to look at scripture as something that is more profound than its plain and humble style might indicate. And that dialectic of humility and sublimity is something that Augustine gestures towards at the end of this book. The whole glory of the classical world, that pursuit of glory that we've seen in terms of martial achievement on the battlefield, or glory in school debate or whatever, Augustine is going to say the real way to attain an eminence that matters is by humility. And that way that he could not find in the philosophers, he finds in Jesus Christ. That is, God who divests himself of all glory to become in an act of utter humility at the service of all humanity, so that this act of charity allows wisdom literally to come down to us. So that's the story, the Christian story, and that's the story that Augustine came to accept. He does so without rejecting the classical heritage. So I do think that he's probably less Catholic with a little c than I would like to be myself. But he does give a great amount of credit to the Platonists. That's something that we want to take very seriously. He says he finds the logos, the word there, and we've seen that from Heraclitus on, that the logos is there. And we want to keep in mind that, as a final thought, that this is a time when the Roman Empire, what presumably was the culminating empire, the one that all Romans certainly thought would last forever, the last on the scene, that had this civilizational pageant we've seen of empire following empire, from the Near East out. Rome was falling apart. At the time he wrote this, it wasn't quite so obvious. This was written around 400, but the demographic pressures, the Germanic tribes and so on that were pushing so hard on the frontiers, it was clear that order is something that one can't take for granted. And Augustine is giving us in this book, which is really the first of its kind. It's not an autobiography the way we pick up one now, right, which is full of quotidian details. You only have a few events related in any depth. You don't have a lot of names. You don't have a lot of dates. You have the general itinerary of Augustine's early life. What you have, though, is this intensely personal exhibition, a display of not only his deepest self, but that deepest self is in conversation with God, this subjectivity constituted by conversation, as it were. And that's something I think we want to keep in mind with the great conversation, that the point of civilizational, the whole dynamism, is that what constitutes true progress is a conversation amongst persons in relation to whatever ultimate reality there is. And that has to be seen through all the machinations and futilities of power. We are engaged together in a conversation about what is true, good, and beautiful. And that's that intensity, the promise of transcendence, you find in the Confessions of Augustine. You see that it is possible to hold on to something in a world where everything else goes away. And that of course refers to, I think, the central pathos of Augustine's life, which is to find the immutable and to find his anchor in the immutable, that which is unchangeable, that which doesn't pass away. Is there a way to cling to the immutable without maybe giving more credence to the political and the mutable? Certainly we can argue that, and I would want to with Augustine, but philosophy itself was a great revolution, breaking from political mythology, this identification of religion and social order. And I think that revolution is something Augustine is paying homage to in this book, 7. But he wants to see it completed, to see that in the end, the great axis of the world is built upon this dialogue, this conversation between each person and the transcendent ground. The conversation that he invites us into by giving us this intimate account of his interiority. An interiority that isn't really that foreign, even if we don't think of that voice in our own heads. We really do want to think about, who are we talking to? I mean, what is that about? Where are our thoughts going? We have this very deeply developed sense of inwardness that comes with being modern. We wouldn't have that without Augustine and without the Latin Christianity, the Latin Christendom that he helped create.